Hello and welcome back to Giant Talk, the world's first OKR podcast. Today, Giant Talk is delighted to be joined by not one, but two guests. With me today, I have Sarah Parr and Ian Adams. Sarah is an executive coach and has a background in coaching and consulting. Sarah also has over 10 years of experience in the social housing sector and is a non-exec director of two organisations in the sector. Ian is Assistant Director at Magenta Living, the largest housing provider in Wirral, owning and managing around 12,500 properties. And Ian is also the OKR lead for Magenta Living. Today we're going to talk about the challenges faced in the UK social housing sector and why OKRs are a great fit in helping tackle those challenges. So welcome both Sarah and Ian. I'm delighted to have you with us for today's episode. So before we get into our conversation, please can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself? And let's start with Sarah.
Thanks, Carly, and thanks for inviting me to be part of the podcast, which is really exciting. I think I often tell people that I fell into the social housing sector, and it wasn't really something that was on my radar until I went to work for a software business a number of years ago who sold their product into the sector, and that really opened my eyes up to everything that social housing does. I've always really had a very strong social purpose, so naturally the sector appealed to that, and I've kind of stayed attached to social housing in various ways for about 10 years now, as you said. So currently I run my own coaching and consultancy business, and I work with boards and senior leadership teams, both independently and through a number of specialist partner organisations. And really that's how I came to be working with There Be Giants. So I'm now working with the team there, supporting the implementation and the rollout of OKRs with some of our clients, which is great fun and really interesting for me. And as you mentioned, I do also hold a couple of non-executive roles with organisations that provide social housing, which gives me slightly different perspective as well. So I like to think that ultimately that benefits my clients as well, because I've always got half an eye on what their board and other stakeholders are thinking. So that's a bit about me.
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, it's great to obviously have you on board with There Be Giants team, assisting with our OKR implementation for our clients. Ian, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Yeah, hi, Carly. Somewhat like Sarah, I too kind of fell into social housing by accident, or kind of via a different route. I was at university on a degree I didn't like. Managed to get myself off that degree and was running around looking for something that appealed a bit more to my interest, really, and eventually found myself on a housing studies degree at Sheffield Hallam University. And so I've kind of been in housing since student days. Graduated in 1993, which will give you an idea of my age. And since then I've worked in a number of housing associations across Merseyside, starting off in housing officer roles, up to kind of the position I'm at now as business assurance and performance director at Magenta Living. Excuse me. My current role, I'm responsible for working with the board and the exec teams on things such as strategic planning, business assurance, performance and risk management, customer research, bits around data governance and data quality, and I'm also our organisation's data protection officer. So that's a bit of background about me and my kind of professional roles.
Thanks, Ian. That's great. So I think a good place to start is let's start by discussing some of the challenges currently being faced in the social housing sector, and I'll let maybe Ian start with that one.
Okay. There are a few which spring to mind, and I'm thinking kind of more kind of long-term strategic as opposed to kind of the hopefully shorter-term challenges that we're currently facing around kind of dealing with COVID and the pandemic issues. I think one of the main significant challenges for the social housing sector is going to be the whole low carbon agenda in a number of ways. That presents challenges. Firstly, around the affordability of those kind of requirements for existing social housing stock, and also the capacity of kind of the supply chain to meet the need to supply those kind of low carbon initiatives across existing housing stock. But I think also there's a number of challenges in terms of new development and new build. I think we're increasingly going to see a reliance upon more modern methods of construction to develop more thermally efficient homes, which is great in one way because it's helping that low carbon agenda. But again, you would think we're also likely to experience kind of supply chain issues. And I think also it's likely to present challenges for customers because thermally efficient homes obviously require people to live in them within a different way than they currently live in, kind of, more traditionally built homes, not opening windows, for example, and things like that. So I think there's some challenges there. I think the whole issue around customers, the customer experience and customer expectations is an area of challenge, not least because it's the right thing to do, but also it's going to be backed up by changes to regulation. The regulators currently review the consumer standards from the RSH. And I think also one of the challenges for the sector is around internal organisational issues, around organisational culture and the way we work, and the whole issue around the world of work. The majority of housing organisations, in my experience, before the pandemic, were kind of traditional, everybody's in the office kind of organisations, which obviously no longer applies. And that presents a number of challenges to the way that we work with ourselves and we interact with each other and the ways in which we interact with our customers. So they're some of the key challenges that I think we're likely to face.
Yeah, thank you. There's some some interesting points. I think especially around the culture and the internal issues. I think it's hit home, I guess, over the past 2 years now, shall we say, since the pandemic, and having to really rethink how teams work, especially when you've got maybe half the team at home working remote or more. Sarah, I wonder if you've got any other, points to add on to that in terms of challenges.
Yeah, thanks, Carly. And I absolutely agree with everything that Ian's just said there. I think there's a couple of other things on my mind. I think just building on that internal challenge that we've just talked about, I think housing has a great opportunity actually in thinking about staff. And I think, with all organisations, there's a real challenge at the moment in terms of competing for getting the best staff and retaining them. And I think one of the things that really works well for housing, that is a challenge and it is a risk. I mean, it's shot to the top of risk registers for boards. But I think that, connecting, if organisations can help staff really connect to the purpose and the good that housing is doing, then there's a real win there for them. I think the others that were on my mind, I think this idea of competing priorities, I think more than ever, really, housing's going to have to do more. There's such a need within our society for the services and the support that housing organisations provide. And it's not just about housing for a lot of these organisations, it's about other support services as well. But, we all know that there's going to be some real need to look at funding and start to find a way to recoup some of what we've had to spend over the past couple of years. So I think there's going to be a real need, as ever, to just think a bit more creatively. And I think it's those organisations that are going to come through well. We've also got the uncertainty around the political landscape that we're operating in as well, and who knows what that's going to look like over the next few years. So, yeah, I think there are some real challenges, but I do think housing is in a great position to try and address those, but needs to be on the front foot with it, really.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that gives a good overview of the key challenges faced in the sector. Let's dig a little bit into OKRs, and just want to start by asking Ian, how did you come across OKRs and what was the rationale behind using them at Magenta?
like much change, our kind of journey towards OKRs began with a crisis. We had a significant internal issue relating to how we managed and maintained our housing stock, which ultimately led to us self-reporting to our regulator because we felt we were potentially in breach of one of their regulatory standards. So we did a big piece of work researching into kind of the causes behind the issue that we identified, and what it basically boiled down to, when we got to the real brass tacks of it, was we basically weren't living our organisational values. Our organisation has 3 values, which are ambition, adaptability, and accountability. Particularly in relation to the issue itself, but then when we looked at it more deeply, we could see that it was evident across the whole organisation that kind of traditional things and problems that you identify when you start digging into these things is people working in silos, lack of ownership, lack of accountability, issues around data, technology, and issues around engagement and communication. And so, long story short, we ended up in a position where we had a number of interim executive directors working with us, and I was reporting into one of them. And he basically quickly observed that certainly at a kind of senior level, executive and board level, that the attention of the board and the executive team was just spread far too thinly in order for them to be able to effectively run the organisation. So he was speaking to me and he said, have you ever heard of OKRs? And I said, no. He said, there's a book by John Doerr, go away and read it, come back and we'll have a chat. So I did, and quickly realised the potential benefits of OKRs in helping us address some of the issues that we'd identified on the back of this issue that we had, specifically around helping the board, the exec and management really clarify and focus on what's important, really helping us to focus on the outcomes as opposed to monitoring the delivery of what seemed like an incessant number of to-do lists. The big winner in terms of the big kind of potential benefit that we saw around should we choose to deploy OKRs was around the whole issue around involvement and engagement of colleagues. We've been learning for years through staff surveys and the like that our middle managers in particular felt particularly disengaged from kind of the whole process of determining not just what we do, but what it is that we want to achieve and how we'll go about achieving it. And having read the book and spoken to a few people, I quickly realised that OKRs would have a real benefit in helping us start to address some of those things. One of the key benefits for me, particularly given my role, and it was kind of a personal win, if you like, was I could see how it could massively help us reduce kind of the duplication of oversight and governance that we had going on in the organisation. So, for example, we'd have what we called our annual plan, which kind of captured everything that we did, and progress on that would be reported to board every time they met. But accompanying that, there'd also be secondary reports on everything which was already in the annual plan. So I could see through the OKR system the potential to remove a load of that duplication. The benefit for the board and the executive of that is it frees up a load more of their time to focus on what's important.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a few things that you've mentioned there which, you identified was causing some of the issues during, I guess, the crisis. So the working in silos, the lack of accountability, and obviously the big factor of engagement or, not as much engagement, which OKRs can definitely help with. So I know we've touched on some of the benefits there, but Sarah, what would you say, why would you say, OKRs are a great fit for the social housing sector, and what are the benefits are to be had?
I think I started to touch on one earlier around this idea of connecting staff to kind of the purpose of the organisation. And, that not only is a great kind of motivational tool for colleagues, but actually, when you step back and look at what the workforce of the future, those coming into work now are looking at, then actually I think what we're going to see is much more focus from people on purpose and values within an organisation. And I think OKRs are a really great way of enforcing that. And I think the other thing about that is, a lot of organisations in housing have diversified, they've perhaps got bigger, there's been quite a lot of mergers in the sector. So actually you're talking about large organisations, lots of different teams. And I think OKRs provide a great opportunity for organisations to really focus on what's important in each area of the business, but keeping it all connected, and staying true to the common goals and the strategy that the board have set. And I think there's massive potential there. I think the other great benefit and opportunity is this idea around agility and around innovation. So I think more and more, it's more and more difficult, isn't it, to see what's going to happen over the next 12 months even.
Yeah.
So having something like OKRs that means you're regularly revisiting what's important, I think is just a really great tool given how quickly things change. And I think, I don't know if others would agree, you might have a view. I think the housing sector surprised itself a little bit when the pandemic started about the agility that it had within it, and that it could change. And I think, if OKRs can really help to sort of tap into that and make sure that this is sustained. This is not something that we just did in crisis mode, and it's bringing in people. We all know as well, often the best ideas within an organisation are created in those that are at the front line, that are in our teams. They're not always created by the exec or the senior leadership team or the board, and having a system where you're creating OKR squads that really give people a voice. I just think that's going to really tap into a lot of the great intellectual capital that you've got right throughout the organisation as well. So yeah, the more I've kind of learned about OKRs in my time, the more I can absolutely see there's a really, really good fit there.
Yeah, I think those are two good points that you made. And I think just going back to the connecting stuff to the purpose of the organisation, I think a lot of organisations have seen over the past couple of years, like I said, that jump to purpose, I think, being really important. I think even when looking for a new role or a new career, and we've spoken about it before on podcasts about purpose being more, purpose over paycheck, the sense of purpose, and I think that's a really important area to touch on. I just want to ask Ian, when we previously spoke and we was talking about the idea of this podcast, you mentioned a failed attempt at deploying OKRs. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about this? Go into a little bit more detail on that.
Yeah, sure. Put my hands up. It was my mistake. I'd read the book. OKRs, a relatively simple concept, which I mistakenly assumed would be simple to deploy. They weren't. OKRs are both a method of describing things, which you say, okay, to describe something, writing down, but actually writing good OKRs is quite a challenge. I think certainly organisations I've worked in, and I don't know if it's true of the wider sector, we're great at writing things to do. We're not particularly brilliant at describing the outcomes we want to achieve and what evidence that we'll see of having achieved those things. So that takes effort. And the other thing that I massively kind of misunderstood was kind of the work involved in the OKR process in terms of transitions, check-ins. The process has a cadence and a life to it, but that cadence and life needs maintaining. And so I underestimated the resource commitments to kind of maintain and support those processes. So in the first year, because basically I tried to do it by myself, working with the organisation and the senior leadership team, all we ended up with was another version of our traditional annual plan, but we called the things within it OKRs, which clearly they weren't. So yeah, that was kind of a learning curve, and it was kind of after that first year, which also tied into the kind of the timing of the incident that we had and the organisational learning and soul searching that came on the back of that we said we can still absolutely see the benefit that OKRs can bring in helping us to move the organisation forward from the position that we were in, but we're probably going to need a bit of help in order to deploy them effectively and well. So yeah, so that was kind of the learning curve that we went on.
Yeah, and I think the book is, I mean, of course, it's a good place to start, but I think, like you said, you held your hands up and thought you could go and run with them and implement them, but there's a lot more to it. I think it gives a good understanding of OKRs and how you can use them, but when it comes to actually implementing them into your organisation, it's a different subject. And I think, as we say a lot, one size doesn't fit all. So you can look at examples and how organisations have set OKRs and implemented them in their organisation, but it doesn't necessarily translate into yours. How did, having gone through that, failure of implementing them, how did Magenta approach using OKRs and how did you find that process?
Well, obviously, after kind of the first year and the difficulties that we had, we recognised that we'd need some help. So we approached a number of organisations to see who might be a good fit with us and to work with to help us implement an OKR framework more effectively than we'd managed in that kind of first year. Excuse me. We decided to work with There Be Giants. In part because as an organisation, we previously worked with Georgia Parker, There Be Giants' culture specialist. She'd worked with Magenta Living in the past, so we knew her. She knew us as an organisation, which helped. So working with There Be Giants, we developed our first set of annual OKRs and the first quarter OKRs. As part of that process, we recognised that it wasn't something I could try to do on my own. We needed to take the organisation with us, and we needed a group of people with skills, background, knowledge to help us, increase the likelihood of a successful deployment. So we trained approximately 10 of us as OKR coaches. We included one of our non-executive board directors as part of that training, just so that we had, at least one person at board level of an understanding of, what OKRs are, the benefits they can bring. But one of the things that we're also keen to do was also this kind of recognition that with OKRs, if you're really pushing for kind of growth, innovation, step changes in performance, it's important to recognise that, you are going to fail to hit some key results now and again, but that's okay. And that I think is a bit of a cultural change. It requires quite a, adult conversation between the board and the organisation. So that was one of the reasons why we wanted, a non-exec board director on that cohort. Subsequent to that, we then put a further 6 colleagues through to OKR master level. And the rationale for that was to give those people an even greater skill set, to particularly enable us to work with the leaders in the organisation, the board, the exec team, because we need to take them on the journey with us, obviously, and give us the greater chance of success with our deployment. In terms of how we found it, I think it's been rewarding for everybody involved. But, like anything, it's not been without its challenges, and we've still got some way to go, I think, before we're utilising and fully working with OKRs in a way which is kind of standardised and fully understood by the organisation. At the moment, we have, not to get too technical on the process, but we've kind of annual and quarterly OKRs. We've not really cascaded it down to a greater level of granularity beyond that level. We're still learning as we go, and we are still very much at the start of that journey. So some of the challenges we've found around resources and time, it is a new way of working. And obviously, this first year has kind of been the first year of a pandemic, and not only are we learning about OKRs, most of us who've traditionally been office-based are still learning how to use things like Zoom and Teams and Group Map and Wirral and, kind of all these online collaborative tools that we're having to become familiar with, which are really useful for working with OKRs. There's a whole load of issues around kind of energy and communications, taking people with us, making sure that we can get face-to-face time with people. That whole kind of way of working just seems to take a bit more effort than it used to do when you were in a building with each other. And one of the challenges which you mentioned is kind of, this whole issue around being really clear and focused on outcomes, particularly the key results bit, articulate the evidence that we're going to see and get into those, really robust metrics that will provide evidence of outcomes being achieved. It's still a learning process for many of us, articulating outcomes in that way. We've still got work to do on that, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously, sometimes not hitting key results, and something that we talk about a lot at Debbie Giants is the concept of test and learn and adapt. And I think it's all part of the process. It's not something that everyone's going to get their head around overnight. And I think, like you said, it takes time. And I think it's important, and it's a good, you've gone down the OKR coaching route. And it's important, I think, to have those champions in the organisation to keep the momentum going with OKR. So I definitely think there's some positives there, and it seems like you're definitely on the right track. And you sound like an OKR champion talking there, Ian.
I think the coaches themselves have found the whole process really rewarding, not just from kind of a personal development point of view, but in helping them liaise with and engage with more colleagues from across the organisation, because OKRs, by the definition and the way they're established, really kind of drive that kind of cross-departmental working engagement, and they really kind of help break down some of those departmental silo walls. And I think just in terms of, everyone's feeling a bit more isolated because we're all working out of bedrooms and home offices and sheds and things like this, but just it encourages people to engage with people that they wouldn't necessarily have engaged with had they even been in the same building. So we're seeing some real benefits from that in terms of organisational collaboration and cohesion. So it's proven really rewarding.
Yeah, definitely that working cross-functionally is really, really important as well. You touched a little bit on culture, and as I mentioned, Georgia, our culture lead. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing on culture alongside the deployment of OKRs?
Yeah. We have, on the back of the kind of the issues that were kind of the catalyst for the decision to deploy an OKR framework, we developed a transformational change program, which we've called the Magenta Way. And basically the key aims of the Magenta Way, if you like, are to better embed the values of the organisation right throughout the organisation. Those things around ambition, adaptability, accountability, and OKRs obviously have kind of a great synergy with those values, particularly around, I think, ambition and adaptability. One of the things, as I mentioned, that we're trying to do is through this kind of cultural transformation work is address some of the issues, particularly, as I mentioned, that our middle managers felt around a lack of engagement with the organisation generally, but also in the what it is we want to achieve, how we're going to go about achieving it, and the OKR process, if you like, really helps with that. Through developing the OKRs themselves, we're pulling in a great number of key contributors into determining and drafting what those OKRs are on an annual and quarterly basis. We're more engaged through the transitions and the check-in process. So that's kind of coming along. We've also implemented a scheme called Rising Stars. And what that's about is about identifying in and investing in kind of the development of our future leaders. So we have a number of people at different levels of the organisation, some kind of, frontline staff, for want of a better expression, some kind of team leaders and more junior managers have been put through kind of a development programme, an externally facilitated development programme, which has been absolutely fantastic. We had a first cohort kind of graduate from that programme just before Christmas, and it was absolutely really rewarding to see the changes in some people. Some people on that programme I'd worked with previously, or I'd met throughout the organisation, and kind of even through working with them quite frequently, you'd identified, or you'd thought that, well, they might be hiding the light under a bushel, they're a bit quiet. Everyone that came through, it just seemed to be filled with this huge amount of confidence and energy and drive to really succeed and help the organisation succeed, which was really kind of inspiring and rewarding to see. We've also been investing in developing the coaching skills and coaching capacity for all managers in the organisation. One of the reasons for that is we want kind of what you might call one-to-ones, PDPs, performance conversations between managers and people who report to them, to be set in kind of a more coaching context, as opposed to a kind of command and control, do as I say, do as I do kind of a context. Again, to foster innovation, bring ideas through, help support that kind of OKR process and that cultural change that we want. One of the other things we've also been doing is we've set up a series of what we call colleague experience panels. And in effect, they are groups of staff. They're all kind of a cohort of a kind of a similar management or organisational level, so people feel more freely and or feel more better able to talk more openly and freely about what it's like to work for Magenta Living. Part of the rationale for that is we wanted to kind of, regardless of whether people are involved or not, just kind of increase the general levels of psychological safety within the organisation, so that colleagues feel able to speak openly with other colleagues, but also, as a mechanism by which we can identify and implement tangible changes to the way we work, and have that come from colleagues themselves in kind of in a forum in which they feel safe to do so. So they're kind of like the main activities that we're doing in that area. But OKRs, particularly around the engagement aspects and the ambition and the accountability, have been really helpful in helping us move that agenda along.
It sounds like you've got some really positive initiatives there. I think for OKRs to be successful, you obviously need to cultivate the right company culture. We know it can be one of the biggest killers of OKR. So I think there's some really positive things that you've got going on. I think psychological safety is so important. It's something that I became aware of, recently since I joined Therapy Giants, and especially talking to Georgia myself. And it's so important for employees to be able to speak out and not feel afraid of what they say might not be what people want to hear, or just having that openness. I think it's really important. Sarah, what would you say to anyone listening that may be considering the use of OKRs in their organisation is the biggest benefit for doing so? I know we've touched on various benefits, but if there was one, I guess you could pinpoint. Is that difficult?
Yeah. It is difficult. It is difficult because you know what, Collie, I had one in mind, but actually something that Ian has said when he's been talking has reminded me of another which might just edge it. Am I allowed to have two? Yeah,
let's have two. Let's do more than one benefit.
So the one that Ian mentioned that I think it's worth just picking up on, I think that ability to help break down silos that might still exist within the organisation is a really important one. I think that there's been a lot of work done by lots of housing organisations to try and do that, but I think it still remains a challenge. And I think that adopting an OKR approach really proactively tackles some of that. So I think that's definitely worth a mention. I think that the other really that I had thought previously was it is driving that targeted focus on growth or change, so there have been a lot of large transformation programs over the past few years in the sector, but actually we now need to be thinking what comes next and how do we embed that ongoing growth and change, and in doing that, making sure that housing organisations stay agile and relevant and ultimately provide the best value to their customers and the other stakeholders, because that's really what the sector is all about. So yeah, if you'll allow me to have two, I'll have those two. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We'll let you have two. And I was just thinking when you mentioned that about we don't always know what's going to happen. Change, isn't, it's ever constant. But I think it's helping you to be more adaptable and agile, and I think obviously that's such a huge benefit.
Just to pick up on Sarah's point, I think she makes a good point in that, and where it's kind of evident for us is that we've already started kind of developing our OKRs for next year, and it's apparent that the area where we think we're going to have, in effect, the best ones, if you like, are around our basically transforming our service delivery and developing our digital offer and how we tailor that to the needs of customers. And that kind of whole channel shift, to use a term away from, people in effect are very unlikely to be coming into the office as much as they used to, customers, that is. So yeah, that kind of whole digital transformation journey will be driven in our place by OKRs.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And finally, Ian, having gone through a failed attempt, can you give our listeners a top tip or two that might help them in deploying OKRs in their own organisation? It might be that if there's someone listening that is sort of struggling or going through a sort of failed attempt, and just wondered if you've got two.
Yeah, sure. I think before you start, I think it's important to try to, clarify what benefits it is that you're trying to realise. Is there a particular issue or problem that you think OKRs might help you resolve, or a particular benefit that you might want to achieve through OKRs? How will OKRs help? They may not be appropriate for everyone, but they will be appropriate and will be really useful in certain circumstances and situations. My key learning and tip is don't underestimate the work involved. The mistake I made was thinking that it's just a matter of phrasing things differently, if you like. Just let's take a plan and turn it into something that we'll call it OKRs. It's not. It's the process and the cadence where the work is, but also the process and the cadence where the real value lies in those benefits around engagement, clarity, communication. But it does take work and effort. And if you're concerned about it, speak to others and get help if you need to from someone who knows what they're doing. That was a big benefit, working with Derby Giants to get our deployment rolled out and contributing to its success, really.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for joining me today. It's been I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think we started talking about the challenges in the social housing sector, but I think there's definitely a lot of positives. We spoke about a lot of positives to using OKRs in the sector and the benefits that you can get out of that. And I think it's been a real positive conversation, and it's good to hear how Magenta are working with OKRs, and I guess talking about, that there are challenges in the social housing sector, but there's also over the past year identified many, opportunities. So I really enjoyed talking to you. So thank you both for joining me. Thank you. And thank you to our Giant Talk listeners for listening to another episode. As always, we'd love to hear your feedback. You can get in touch with us by emailing growth@derbygiants.com, and stay tuned for another episode. Thank you.